Hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I am Bruce.
And welcome to episode 83.
Hey!
Chugging right along, quarter of the way through the season, which means it's time for a deck tale. We figured we'd switch things up. Bruce, you brought yours.
Yeah, I brought a little friend.
Do you want me to introduce her, or do you want to
I would
introduce
jump
her
right
yourself?
in. So,
All right.
my commander deck, my commander for this one is Inniaz, the Gale Force. Inniaz is a 4/4 flyer, costs 3 and 2 blue, and the first ability is 2 with a hybrid white-blue, which means you can use either white or blue for that. Attacking creatures with flying get +1/+1 until the end of the turn. So it has what, on the surface, sounds like lousy fire breathing. 3 mana to get the +1, but it's not just +1, it's +1/+1. So you get it on both sides. And yes, you can activate this multiple times. The next ability is whenever 3 or more creatures you control with flying attack, each player gains control of a non-land permanent of your choice, controlled by the player to their right. So in other words, if I attack with 3 creatures, I then get to choose a permanent from each person's, from the permanents they have out, not including lands, and swap them to the person to their right. And no, this doesn't mean I can go, that person's soul ring goes to this person, who then passes the soul ring to the next person, who then passes it to me. That's not how this works. They all get passed at the same time. So if there's a particular card you're looking for, it has to work its way all the way around the table until it gets to you. So,
Yeah.
I
like the flavor of this mechanic, because it evokes, like a tornado or like a hurricane, of just like a swirling things getting caught up in the wind, and it's a funky little thing that you just love to see.
I saw the card, and I wanted to build blue white, and I didn't want Azorius. I wanted something a little bit different. And this is one of the cards from Jumpstart, I believe. I like the set, and I knew that it hadn't been built that much, so I wanted to give it a shot. So I leaned heavily onto that blue-white flyings theme, and I pulled a lot of the cards from a previous deck that had been built for me by Andrew McGreeny, who was kind enough to build this one as part of our... we had done a Secret Santa at one of the, I believe it was a Gen Con, and he pulled my name and put together basically with Spirits Tribal, helmed by Brago King Eternal, which was kind of funny because it then led people to believe it was a bounce deck, when in actuality it was, but not really. It was more a case of, we can bounce them, so now they're all untapped. There weren't a lot of enter the battlefield effects and that kind of thing. So I took the basis a number of cards from that deck. So there's a strong spirit theme in this deck, and that's due to a lot of the cards coming getting ported directly from that deck into this one. And then I mixed in a few other cards. So.
Yeah, I mean, the times that I've played against this deck, it has definitely... It's all about the flying, honestly.
Yeah.
And as long as you can get Inniaz down and then 2 combat, you should be able to do the thing at least once. And it's I mean, from what I've seen, it's tougher than you'd think.
It's funny. I found, at least initially, it was very much boom or bust. It just seemed like the deck would explode, and then other times it just wouldn't go anywhere. But I'm finding more now, if I keep the focus more on playing out the creatures and trying to keep enough creatures out there to deter people from attacking, while still being able to swing here and there, as long as that's where I'm looking to set up, then I find the deck is pretty resilient. And sometimes this means you're not playing Inniaz. Inniaz is just sitting there, and you're mostly using it, as a one-time thing. You play it out to get one effect, and then that's all you're really looking for. So I found that lately it's as long as I'm playing it that way, it's a lot more resilient.
I guess let's dive into some of the cards.
Sure.
I think where my mind goes when I think about this card is trying to, like, do you find yourself trying to balance more towards that second or that last line or that second line? So, like, are you trying to more buff your flying creatures, or are you trying to do the switcheroo more often?
Way more trying to buff my creatures. I find that it's bizarre how many times you're playing a game and the opponent to my right doesn't have anything in particular that I want. Or somebody has something that's a miserable permanent that they can't have. You want to take it from them. But then you're giving it to the person on their right, and it turns out it's just as bad. It's, Inniaz transferring ownership of Smothering Tithe isn't doing anything. It just means somebody else is now getting all those treasures as opposed to the person before. So unless you're the one getting it, it's not as effective. So you can pass it over, and then somebody else gets the benefit for a while. So there's kind of there are some restrictions there. And I find that a lot of times when I'm looking at what I want to take, I'm looking at mana rocks. I'm looking at ways. Okay. Yeah, because because I'm looking at pumping my creatures. So if it's going to cost me 3 mana to give all of my flyers +1, you know what? If I can get another mana rock in and ease that cost a little bit, or give myself some more mana so I can pay it, that's kind of what oftentimes that's what I'm looking for, which, in the greater scheme of things, that's underwhelming, and I don't really want to build the deck around that idea. There are some cards in here that basically give me the benefit no matter who owns it. So those are the ones I try and pass off to other people.
Your Heartstones.
Right. Like Hearthstone, which most people forget. Most people forget that that's a universal card. Yeah. So it can, everybody gets to use it, and it doesn't matter who controls it. So as long
gravitational shift.
Yes, exactly. That's that sort of thing. Now, there's not a ton of them, but they're there. And I've also got Homeward Path in the deck. So if I find that I'm giving out a few too many cards at some point, I can get them back. So. Yeah,
I like that. When I was looking over this list and trying to remember like the things, I kept sticking to memories where I was on the other side of this and like terrified that my stuff was gonna get messed with, but like overall like okay with it, and understanding that that's like the fun of it. And so it's interesting to like look at this list and understand how much of it is more based in the attacking creatures with flying, get +1/+1 line, I guess, because like a lot of this is buffing flying creatures or are flying creatures. I mean, even to the extent that you've got 15 cards in your token column, and I mean, these are cards that either make tokens or care about tokens.
Yeah.
And generally, most of them, if not all of them, the tokens have flying.
Oh yeah,
and I like that.
Sure it's all of them.
And I like that not only helps obviously with that first line, then you can buff all of your tokens, and generally with tokens it's a go wide strategy.
Yeah.
And obviously with things like Divine Visitation, you're getting these big creatures already.
Right.
So like having them being flying creatures helps a lot with that line, but also the fact that they're tokens means that it's a dime a dozen. So that also helps with that last line. which
Right.
is just like a fun little thing where it's like, I was looking at this list and I clearly just hadn't scrolled far enough or had it on a narrow monitor at the time, and I was just like, man, like it would make sense to have like some sort of tokens that you can give away so that you're not getting the short end of the stick here.
Right.
And then I kept scrolling and I was like, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. 15 cards. Wow. Yep. Nope. That makes sense. And it's nice because it's not, the deck's not based around tokens, but they like the synergies obviously with the other creatures.
Sure.
The fact that they are flying and the fact that they are a dime a dozen and repeatable makes that part particularly shine. It
Right.
makes it feel like this deck was meant to be flying tokens. But love that Divine Visitation.
Yeah, I'm always a fan of Divine Visitation, and considering the number of cards in here that that create much smaller tokens normally, that works out really well. So, and even setting aside Divine Visitation, I mean, Godhead of Awe, 4/4 flyer that says other creatures are 1/1.
Yeah.
So the thing is that my creatures fly. So they were already kind of small to begin with. They were probably already 1/1s. So I'm okay with everybody else's big beaters being 1/1s, even if they have +1/+1 counters on them, just because it also means that my flyers are much more likely to get in and deal damage without me having to take a ton of damage if I don't have quite enough blockers to manage the situation. So
Yeah. Especially when you have things like favorable winds or gravitational shift out, where like your flying spirits or your flying tokens will just get bigger than 1/1 anyway.
right.
So like having Godhead of Awe kind of turns all of this even more into your favor because nobody else will be generally expecting it too much.
Right. And in theory, if you're playing Inniaz for 5, on the following turn, if you've got 6 mana, you can use that first ability twice. So all of those 1/1s become 3/3s. So your 1/1s are now a bit of a force to be reckoned with. So
Yeah.
it can go a little crazy.
Especially too, like if next turn you're attacking with Inniaz, they're a 4/4 to begin with. Even with Godhead of Awe out, if you're bumping with Inniaz twice, it's already back to a 3/3. Like it's fine.
Yeah.
And I love that like Inniaz, and we see this a lot with a lot of modern or contemporary legendary creatures, is that they do a lot.
Yeah.
But like this interacts with itself very well. Three mana isn't nothing. It's quite a lot, especially in these colors. But there are certain, especially in this deck, there are certain things where you can end up really pushing that line of pump pretty high.
Right.
I mean,
we keep, we've mentioned a couple times this is very much a go wide strategy with the tokens and and how your flyers tend to be a little smaller. And then, you can use the Inniaz, pump it twice, sometimes 3 times if you're lucky. And that really helps the go wide strategy. Something to keep in mind is that Hearthstone and Training Grounds are both in here. Now, Training Grounds says activated abilities of creatures you control cost up to 2 less to activate. The effect can't reduce the amount of mana an ability costs to activate to less than 1 mana. Well, with Training Grounds out, Inniaz only costs 1 to activate, and it's either 1 white or 1 blue, which pretty much every land in the deck makes, either white or blue. So suddenly for 1 mana, you can pump all of your creatures. Well, this is where Inniaz can be a Voltron deck all on it, all by itself. I've had more than once when I get that opportunity where I'll turn Inniaz into a 9/9, swing at one player with Inniaz, and then swing everything else at somebody else. So you're using go wide on one person and Voltron on another, and it's a real beat stick, and you're putting pressure on more than one opponent at the same time. So
for sure,
it works out pretty well that way.
I think it's interesting too because I remember being up against this deck once and feeling like I was pretty sure that I had it, I think it was just down to me and you.
I think I know the deck. I remember the game.
Yeah, you kept coming at me, and if you have Training Grounds out, like even if you're coming at me with 4 creatures, say it's Inniaz and 3 other flyers. 1, I'm not ready for flyers all the time.
Right.
And 2, if you're pumping all of your flyers with a single mana, say you have 4 creatures, every mana you're pumping adds 4 damage to my face. And so things can get out of hand real fast, and it's awesome to see. It's so surprising, especially if you're if you're down to 2 or 3 people, you will be more focused on moving their pieces around to make sure that you can either get through for the damage or ruin their plan so that they can't just come back at you the next turn. Because other than obviously the angels from Divine Visitation have vigilance, but other than intangible virtue, there are only a handful of things that have vigilance in this. So if you're going out swinging, then you got to make sure that you've got the mana to do so.
Right. And honestly,
which can be very easy.
You alluded to it. The idea of using the second ability to open up the defenses.
Mm-hmm.
And you can easily do that. Sure, if they've got a 4/4 flyer and you want to hit them, you can move that 4/4 flyer to another opponent. It's still a problem for you. It's still a threat. But now it's a threat from somebody else. It does mean that they're open. So you can, you get to control, you can do a lot to mess with combat, as you're attacking and moving their defending creatures around. It can definitely improve your situation. I think it's an underrated part of what Inniaz can do when it comes to that, when it comes to moving permanents around.
I think it's definitely a target that gets painted on you early game, especially while people are trying to build things up, because people are afraid of it. But also, late game, it's vital in pulling through to win.
Yeah.
We're gonna throw it to break real quick.
Okay.
Throw it to our ads, and then when we get back, we'll dive deeper into some of these cards. I think it's a very cool deck, and you won't want to miss the end of this one.
Definitely not. This episode of Temple of the False Pod is brought to you by Floodgate. Really, have you read the card? Floodgate.
Floodgate. In a flying deck? And now back to you. Welcome back. We're doing a deck tale. This week we're talking about Bruce's Inniaz the Gale Force deck. As you might have heard, Floodgate's in this deck.
That's right.
Floodgate, for those who don't know, is 3 and a blue for a 0/5 wall. It says, if Floodgate gains flying, bury it. So, from here on out, I'm going to read the Oracle text because it gets real confusing. It says, when Floodgate leaves the battlefield, it deals damage equal to half the number of islands you control, rounded down to each non-blue creature without flying. So you look at all the creatures that aren't blue, have no blue, and then you look at those, and then you look at the ones of those that don't have flying, and you deal X damage, where X is half of the number of islands rounded down that you control. Bruce, Floodgate in a flying deck?
Well, almost none of my creatures are affected by this because they all fly.
Or are blue.
Yeah. So for the most part, this is something that when it leaves play, it's going to do 1 or 2 points of damage to all of my opponent's creatures, or at least the ones that don't fly. So it can clear up the board of if an opponent is running tokens, it can clear the board of a large group of smaller tokens. Honestly, I just like the idea that it was an 05 that could do damage to other people's creatures without touching mine. And when you get the opportunity to play a card that where the flavor text is quick, Rearhawk, teach me to swim.
That's very good.
That's pretty good. So
it's it's so silly. It's. I guess my follow-up question is: do you have ways to give it flying?
No.
What?
No.
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 So it's a good old 0/5.
It's a 0.
That when somebody gets rid of it, I guess.
Right. At least I don't think I have a way to give it flying.
Yeah,
it was certainly not
from a quick glance. It doesn't seem like you do.
It was not intended. So,
I love that, because then it kind of becomes this political thing where if somebody has 20 tokens on the ground somewhere,
right,
they could be like, you can be like, if you've got a way to get rid of this wall.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you just bounce it or flicker it,
yes, this deck can definitely do that.
Goblins in this case,
right? I've most of the time with Floodgate, I'll play it out, and then your opponents have to decide: do they want to use removal early when it does minimal damage, or do they want to wait and give me the opportunity to get out more islands?
Right.
And as I do, how big are their creatures? So, obviously someone who's got a 5, whose creatures are all 5/5s, is really not going to care, because odds are I'm never going to do 5 damage to all the creatures. So, so it falls to other stuff. But I like the card. I wanted to run it.
Something that I noticed that I feel like kind of snuck its way in here, and I hope one day you get to do the thing with this. I noticed during the break, you've got Ink Moth Nexus in here, which obviously, well, maybe not obviously. For those who don't know, Ink Moth Nexus is a land that can tap for a colorless mana, or for 1 mana, you turn this land. Ink Moth Nexus becomes a 1/1 Blink Moth artifact creature with flying and infect until end of turn. It's still a land. So obviously, if you need an extra flyer to get Inniaz to go off, or if you just need a little bit more damage, well, I guess it does infect, and only infect. But I guess if you need another flyer to trigger Inniaz, then great. Or you're flying in with Ink Moth, or I guess the Blink Moth artifact creature, you can pump it up with Inniaz and get in for your infect.
Yeah, that's most often what ends up happening.
Have you gotten to do it?
I've dealt but I have yet to kill anybody with it. So there's not nearly enough proliferate to really pad this up.
You're gonna either need proliferate, or you're gonna need a lot of mana to get Inniaz to really pump it up, or all of your favorable wins type things.
Right, but all the cards that will just pump it naturally,
or I guess multiple attacks.
Well, yes, but for the most part, you're not getting multiple attacks.
No.
This gets infect. It doesn't get indestructible. So once things start getting out of hand, people will find a way. So
yeah.
But yeah, that is why Ink Moth is in here.
I love it. I want to see it happen.
I have hopes. One of the other ones I wanted to mention was the Nebelgast Herald. I've got it under removal. This one's a 2/1 flying with flash for 2 and a blue. And it says, whenever the Herald or another spirit enters the battlefield under my control, tap target creature and opponent controls. So this happens pretty frequently. I mean, I bet. I can count on getting a creature out just about every turn. And that doesn't even include, I'm not even thinking about the token creatures, which quite often you can, cast on demand. So that way you can mess with your opponent's defenses. And when you're talking about flying creatures, usually there's only 1 or 2 of them that I have to deal with, so I can make that work. The other piece with Nebelgast Herald is Brago King Eternal is just wonderful with this card. Admittedly, Brago bounces these creatures towards the end of my turn after my attack. But if it means that I can tap down one opponent's creature and it leaves them open for every other opponent, there's benefits there too. So
yeah,
the Herald has done some serious work for me, especially with opponents who only have a couple of creatures to block with. It works out pretty well.
Well, is there something like consistently that you're like you come across when playing this deck that you're like, oh, like this is either something that needs more plays, or is it something that you could, I don't know what I'm saying.
Well, okay, so let's just talk about the main piece that I'm having an issue with. With Inniaz, the last ability allows me to take opponents' permanents and give them to other opponents or myself. Mm-hmm. It became obvious early on that this was not going to be as good as I'd hoped it was going to be. But more importantly, in the play group, we have more than one person who really doesn't like it when you mess with their stuff, and that's what Inniaz kind of does. That's one of the features, is keep you from building your machine by taking out cards that you really need, or it's a card I really want, so I'm going to get it onto my battlefield. I really feel like this ability has just made Inniaz a big target. And because Inniaz costs 5, it's not as though you can get the card out before they have an answer. Because by the time you're playing Inniaz, they've seen the 7 cards in their opener plus at least 5, probably 10 cards. If they're concerned about Inniaz, and some of them are, then they're going to have the removal. They're going to have ways to stop it before you can do anything. So, and at 5 mana, this is not a card that you want to have to recast 3 times. I mean, paying 7 mana is already kind of tough. Paying 9 or 11, well, that just starts getting into the range of exorbitant, and can your deck work without Inniaz? Because it's just
right.
It's just been priced out. So there are times when I feel like I'm being targeted when there are other better targets out there, but I understand why. It's because they just don't want me messing with their stuff. It was something that I really hadn't considered deeply enough before I built the deck. With this deck, I really felt like that ability was kind of the throw-in, and I'll get some benefits here and there, and sometimes I won't, but it'll be fine. When in fact it's turned into this, I hate that, I got to get rid of this card. And that's, that can be a little tough to deal with.
It's definitely like one of those things where I guess the choice matters ultimately of like which permanents you're shifting.
Right.
And, for the most part, like the obvious thing would be to like give your opponents, say, like a treasure token each type of thing. Like you just kind of shift things that either they have in common or something that doesn't super affect the board. But I mean, when you start giving them, card permanents, things that aren't tokens, etc., it's this interesting thing where, like, obviously their decks aren't necessarily built for that kind of flexibility, but also yours isn't. But it's an interesting thing where you can also disrupt somebody who is way in the lead it fairly easily, but at the cost of, like, the deck does its thing, which is great. And I think that that's a thing that generally, like, people need to be ready for. And I don't think it necessarily means, you're the threat. It means that either you need to have, like, what this means for the Inniaz player is that you either need to have 4 flying creatures on the battlefield, including Inniaz, when Inniaz comes out. So 3 other ones that are ready to fly. Or you need to have Inniaz out and 2 other flyers, wait a whole turn, because blue and white aren't really known for their haste. And then, like, there's plenty of time for your opponents to politically, like, figure out, like, hey, how do I not get screwed over on this? But also there's plenty of time for them to either remove it or, which is obviously a thing the Inniaz player needs to kind of figure out. So, like, I don't think it's necessarily a hugely powerful thing is the thing. And, like, I get why some people would get, frustrated or salty over this, because it's not, until end of turn type thing, as with a lot of things. But I mean, this is arguably, harder, or I mean, easier to deal with than somebody playing even, a control magic, like card name control magic card on a thing. Because I would say that, like, with this, there is that, you're broadcasting it. It's people can see it coming from a mile away. And I mean, the other thing with that is that this is the only card in this deck that has that effect, which, I mean, I'm sure there are people out there who have loaded Inniaz up to the nines with, take my opponent's things, and so they cannot have them. And I think that's what I love about this deck, is that even, I mean, you had mentioned when it gets up to 9 or 11 mana value.
Yeah.
You got to start thinking about, is it worth playing, or, like, can the deck run without Inniaz? And I think that because of the token package in this deck and how much Inniaz almost forces your deck to congregate around flyers, and how much of those flyers are looking at spirits specifically, that spirit sub-theme really is a savior in this deck.
Right.
If Inniaz continues to either get countered, destroyed, etc. And I love that about this deck.
Yeah, I mean, this is not, the deck is not particularly complex. I mean, a lot of flying spirits, a lot of ways to make token flyers come in and hit for big damage. And there are a lot of cards that give either your creatures or your spirits or flying creatures +1/+1, and it just sort of sits there, so that if your board does get a little, once you develop your board, there's a good chance your 1/1 creatures are already getting +2/+2 from various other cards, and then you can use Inniaz's ability to give them a one-turn pump to really crank up the pain. So
yeah.
Yeah.
This is the part of the episode where I would normally ask you, what's a card that you would think about cutting, and what's a card that you'd think about adding? But I think the thing, I mean, I'll still ask those, but I'm going to preface it with the fact that Inniaz is an Azorius Flyers commander. Like, that's the thing it wants to do. And the fact that blue-white Flyers is such an archetype in, like, almost everything, whether it's, you know, cubes or core sets. It feels like the thing that blue white wants to do through and through.
Right.
Like, there's so many ways to build this deck, and I love that.
Well,
I love that, like, blue white flyers is scalable, I guess, is kind of how I can put it, where like it can be extremely powerful, but it can also be, you know, goofy and
right.
kind of like built around, you know, Luminarch Ascension and Moloku.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, because of what it is, there are so many cards you could just swap. Like, this is
Right.
You know, this is not the most powerful version of blue white flyers. It just, you know, these are a lot of these are cards that were, like I said, came from another deck. A lot of them are cards that I happen to own, because I think that this is a theme that is so wide. You can, you know, there's a lot of cards you can put into this and easily swap out and find something else that would also work. So
I think, yeah, exactly. And like, I think with this deck, you know, with a lot of my decks, I think about every set like, oh, like what cards can I put in, what cards can I take out, either to make this better or more on theme or whatever.
right.
And like, I think that's kind of the beautiful thing with this deck, is that every set is going to have something that could belong in here.
Oh yeah.
And so, like, if you ever feel tired of, you know, half the creatures in this deck, there's things lined up to take its place easy.
Right.
And I love that.
Right. And I will say,
like
with the removal package, there's virtually nothing in the removal package where you remove a card and you add a token or add a creature
Right.
onto the battlefield. You can certainly do that. I mean, that would be an easy swap. So it just that sort of little thing, it's fine. I think the only cards that I feel like are irreplaceable, you can't ever take them out. Probably Hearthstone and Training Grounds, I think, are the two. They just enable that first ability so much that it wouldn't make sense to take them out. The rest of it, I think, the rest of the cards, I think, are very interchangeable. You can mix and match. And you don't even have to stick with the spirit theme. If you want to move off of that, you can certainly do that. But there are so many cards out there that give spirits some kind of bonus that it just makes it easier to see them ramp up through the roof. So
I hope to see more design space within the similar kind of design space that Inniaz is in, where it definitely directs the deck build in a very specific way, but it's not so hand-holdy that the deck has to have, you know, XYZ cards. Like you said, you know, the two cards that you feel should almost always be in this deck are Hearthstone and Training Grounds. But, like, beyond that, like, Blue White Flyers is so generic, but it does a very specific thing with that, like, genericness, you know?
I will say one of the cards that I thought was kind of interesting that I put in without really understanding just how good it was Sphinx of Magosi.
Okay, yeah.
The Sphinx is a 6/6 flyer, not a spirit. It costs 3 blue. And no, it's not a problem. I've never had an issue playing this card out, because by the time you've got 6 mana, I definitely have 3 blue. It's not a problem. But its ability, it's for 2 and a blue. Draw a card, then put a +1/+1 counter on the Sphinx. And you would think, well, doesn't that kind of fight with Inniaz a little bit? And I suppose so, but for the most part, you know when you're looking to draw more cards, and you know when you're looking to pump up your creatures to do damage. So the Sphinx of Magosi has done a lot of work for me as far as, you know, digging to find answers. And again, this is another reason why why Training Grounds and Hearthstone are just so good. I mean, if you can get training grounds out, then the Sphinx for 1 blue, you're getting a +1/+1 counter, a permanent increase, and you're drawing a card. And this doesn't say
and it's not
once
at sorcery speed. Yeah,
right, and it's not even once a turn. You don't have to tap or anything. So if you've got the mana, you can do it again and again and again, which can make this. I mean, the Sphinx starts as a 6/6. You know, draw 3 cards, put 3 counters on it. Well, that's a 9/9 flyer. That's not nothing. And
yeah,
it certainly comes in and really pounds down. More often, I sort of thought this would be a case of, oh, I happen to have 3 extra mana at the end of my opponent's turn. I'll draw a card and put a counter on it. And it really isn't that. It is. It's a beat stick, and it can draw you a lot of cards all at once. I've had more than once when I spent 6 mana to give it 2 +1/+1 counters when it was targeted for death. So if someone had played their Swords to Plowshares and targeted it, and I still gave it the +1/+1 counters because I wanted to draw the cards, and it was just that's the kind of card this is. So I really my eyes were opened a little bit to the Sphinx of Magosi. So I was sort of looking at which card would I look to pull out. As much as I've enjoyed running Boreas Charger, the card was put in there because it was a flying creature and would ramp, and I wanted to make that work. Unfortunately, it just didn't work quite as well as I wanted it to. Too many times the effect only happens once, and you want it to happen multiple times. So I'm not sure that the Charger would stay in the deck. It's just one of the cards that just were a little underwhelming, and were disappointing because I felt like it was something that was going to be on theme. So I was hoping it would work better than it did. So
yeah, and I mean, especially for a card that came out within the past 2 years, it's already been outclassed by other white ramp. But I like that it stays on theme, and even especially if you have got Brago out, you can try and trigger it more than once. But then you're kind of getting into Christmas Land. Well,
and that's just it. So far, I haven't been lucky enough to have the Charger and Brago out at the same time, but
that's the tough thing with 100-card format. So
right, if I can make it happen, that may be all the reason I need to leave the Charger in. But it's proven to be a little tricky, and it's this deck is definitely not something where you want to be leaving something in because it has an enter the battlefield or leave play trigger that you can try and act out more than once. So
I love this deck, and I want to see more of it. I think it just it brings a certain energy to the table when it lands, because of that last line about rotating permanence. And I think that it gives, I mean, even as it's resolving, just having the political nuance of people kind of being like, no, give this one to this person and this one, and kind of trying to fight over everything. It's a lot of fun, and kind of gives it's very chaotic for such a blue and white deck.
Right. An interesting take with the transferring the cards, and it's not something I've really tried, and I may just try this out the next time I get the opportunity to do it, is what does the table want? Talk to your opponent. Talk to your opponents. Yeah, it's like, look, I'm going to take something. What should I take? What should the person on your right, or what
should they get? Yeah.
What should they get?
Either ask the person who's giving what they want to give, or ask the person taking what they want to take.
Right.
Just go around. And then, obviously you don't even have to, even if you ask, you don't have to do what they say,
Right.
That would definitely be an interesting way to play it.
Sure, but you get your opponents involved and create this sub game that that they can be involved in and try and make Inniaz a little more palatable that way, so that everyone thinks that they're the ones who are getting to be at least partially responsible for for what's going on.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's been a fun deck, and looking forward to getting in a few more games with it.
Nice. I'd say I hope I can play against it soon, but it's definitely not the type of thing you want to play on Spell Table.
Spell Table's a little tough for this one, yeah.
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 I think that's going to do it for us this week.
I think so. I don't really have anything else to say about the deck. It's just check out the list and see what you think. Again, this is something that can definitely be powered up if your table proves to be more of a force to be reckoned with than the one that I normally play against. So
yeah. And if you have any recommendations for any cool, fun plays that would just make things wild, then shoot them at us. Just throw it into the wind, and we will listen to it, and that will be as far as I can guarantee. But yeah, no, this was a pretty good deck, Tail. And I'm excited to see what I end up bringing to the table in a few weeks. We'll take it 1 week at a time.
Yep.
So we will see you guys next week. We're Temple of the Falls Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
Thank you again for listening. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the temple.
Bye!
Wait. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. You can reach out to us via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com or on Twitter at falsepodmtg. Bruce is at ManaBurned, and I'm at Andy Weekend, though you'll definitely notice I use the podcast Twitter far more often. Now that we've got you here, make sure you subscribe, rate us on whatever podcast platform you use. It helps us out. It gets us more reach. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. Like a video there. Leave some comments for more casual enjoyment. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with some more timeless discussions about all things casual. So come hang out, and may your fifth land be the temple. Bye-bye. Should I do my best, Bruce? Bye!